Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph 71a of Maseches Kiddushin. We are starting 6 lines from the end of the page. Towards the end of the line it says Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said the following. Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Saba. He said in the name of Saba, a certain elder. Bavel bechezkas keshera omedes ad shivada lecha b'man nifsala. A person from Bavel, from Babylonia, they're bechezkas kshera, they are assumed to be of good lineage, unless you know that there's something that made them puzzle, that made them of bad lineage, of problematic lineage. Shara ratzos, but other lands, bechezkas psul heinomdos, they are assumed to be puzzle. People from other lands are assumed to be puzzle of bad lineage, ad shivada lecha b'man nifsala, until you know, you can confirm that they are of good lineage. Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael it depends. Muchzak psul. If you have a certain family that has assumed it's been assumed, there's a chazaka, it's been assumed that they are puzzle, that they're of bad lineage, so then we have to consider them of bad lineage. Muchzak kasher, and if there's a chazaka, there's an assumption they're of good lineage, so then kasher, then we assume that they are kasher. And again, all of this is relevant for somebody wanting to marry into any of these families. What you have to assume, whether you have to investigate, look into it, track their yichus, track their lineage. So in Bavel, we assume they're fine. In other lands, you have to assume that it's a problem. You have to look into it. In Eretz Yisrael, if there's a muchzak, if there's a family that's assumed to be puzzle, it's puzzle, and you have to look into it to verify maybe they're not. And if they're assumed to be kosher, you can rely on that and assume that they're kosher. Ask the Gemara. There is a contradiction in mashmos, in inference, because we make the following conclusions. Says the Gemara, Hagufa Kashya. This itself is contradictory. Amarta muchzak psul pasal. You said if there's an assumed psul, we assume them that they're disqualified, then they're puzzle. Hastama, but the implication is, but the stam family, if we don't know anything about them, kosher, we assume they're kosher if we don't know one way or another. V'hadar tani, but then we said that if they're muchzak kosher, if we have a chazaka that they're kosher, if there's an assumption that they're good, so then kosher, then we treat them as kosher. Ha-stama, which implies though a stam family, if we don't know anything about them, puzzle, we would assume that they're puzzle. So what is the running assumption if we didn't have any information? The first idea is mashma implies. That's what I was looking for. There's a contradiction of implication here. The first part implies that the stam, the unknown, we would assume that they're kosher. But then it says that if they're muchsa kosher, if we know that they're kosher, then we treat them as kosher, implying that if we don't know anything about them, we always assume they're puzzle. So which one is it? So Amar Rav Huna bar Tachlifa Mishmei de Rav. Rav Huna, the son of Tachlifa, said in the name of Rav, Lo Kashya, it's not a contradiction. Kan lehasio isha, kan lehotzi isha miyado. They're both true. Both implications are correct. It depends on the situation. One is in order to marry the person to a woman, and the other is to motzi, to disqualify the marriage, to require a get. So when it comes to whether I'm allowed to now marry, if a family is looking into someone, should they marry them? So there we say, if we don't know anything about them, so we say, stay away, don't get involved until you look into it. That's where we say the stama, if we don't know anything, we assume puzzle, you have to look into it. However, kan lahotzi. But the other is talking about where they're already married. If they're already married and we realize, wait, we never looked into this, what should we do? So we don't know what their status is, there's no chazaka, there's no assumption here. So in that case we would say, we just leave it. But the assumption is that they're kosher, we don't have to look into it, and we leave it as is. So in terms of the stam, something that we don't know, where there's no chazaka, there's no running assumption, if it's a question of whether to marry them, so then we would say look into it. If it's a question, they're already married, should we look into it? That maybe it was an invalid marriage, improper marriage, so then we say just leave it. So Amar Rabbi Yosef says, second line on the page, Kol shesichaso bibavel masiyin lo isha. Anybody who speaks with a Babylonian accent, or speaks in the language of Babylonia, so then we can marry a woman to him without looking into him, because Babylonia has good lineage, and if he speaks Babylonian or he speaks like a Babylonian, then we can assume he's of good lineage. But says the Gemara, but nowadays that there are tricksters, there are swindlers who they would fake it. They know they're of bad lineage, but they want to get a marriage, they want to get a shidduch, so they pretend to be from Babylonia. Chayshin, and then we're concerned just for that, and we don't rely on just the language they speak. Ze'iri hava kamishtamet minei Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says that Ze'iri was avoiding Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was from Eretz Yisrael. Ze'iri was from Bavel. So Rabbi Yochanan was from Eretz Yisrael, where we say the lineage is more questionable. Bavel has good lineage. So he was avoiding him. Dahava amar le nasibarti, because Rabbi Yochanan was telling him, you should marry my daughter. So Rabbi Yochanan from Eretz Yisrael wanted his daughter to marry Ze'iri, and Ze'iri was not sure about the lineage. Yom Echad, one day, Habu Ka'asli B'Orcha, they were going on the way together. Matu B'Orcha Madamaya, and they arrived at some kind of stream that was blocking the way. Arkavei Rabbi Yochanan Kasvei. So Ze'iri, maybe Rabbi Yochanan was older, he wasn't able to cross, so Ze'iri put him on his shoulders. V'kama Aberle, and crossed him. So Amarle, so Rabbi Yochanan said, O Raisan Keshera, Batzing Lo Ksheran, you're giving me such respect, you're ready to carry me over this stream. My Torah is kosher to you, but my daughter is not? My daitech, what are you thinking that you won't marry my daughter? What, you're trying to avoid me, you don't want her to marry you, you're worried about her lineage. Maybe it's because you're worried because the Mishnah says that there were 10 different types of lineage. Our Mishnah, the beginning of the chapter, 10 different types of lineage that went up from Babel, Kani, Levi, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, and all the other ones. So you're worried about the Mishnah, you're worried about all the types of lineage that went up to Eretz Yisrael. Asked Rabbi Yochanan to Ze'iri, Atu Kani, Levi, Yisraeli, Kulu, Sliku? Do you think that every Kohen went up, every Levi went up, every Yisrael went up? No, of course not. So kihechi deshtir mihani, ishtir nami mehani. Just like there were Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim who remained behind in Babel, so to all the other 7 lineages mentioned, there were some who remained behind in Babel. So Babel also doesn't have such great lineage. So what are you so worried about? What's the difference between me and you? Babel has some bad lineage, Eretz Yisrael, why are you so worried? It says the Gemara, Ishta mitzeh hadam Rabbi Elazar. But Rabbi Yochanan forgot, or he missed, that which Rabbi Elazar had said. That he said, "Go Allah Ezra mi Babel ad sha'asa kesolas nekiya va'Allah." That Ezra didn't go up from Babel until he made it into fine flour, and then he went up. In other words, what Rabbi Yochanan said is not correct. Ezra cleaned out Babel of all the bad lineage. He specifically wanted to bring all the people of bad lineage to Eretz Yisrael, where there would be more oversight. So no, Babel does have better lineage, and it's true there were Kohanim, Levi, and Yisraelim who stayed back, but the other types, all the problematic lineages, Ezra brought them all up to Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, Ula ikol lepumpadisa lebei Rav Yehuda. Ula traveled to Pumpadisa, which was a city in Babylonia. He went to the house of Rabbi Yehuda. Chazik le Rabbi Yitzchak braid Rabbi Yehuda de Gada v'lo nasav. He saw that Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, had grown up and he hadn't gotten married. Amarle, so he said to him, Ula said to Rabbi Yehuda, the father, "My time why haven't you married your son off to a woman? Why haven't you married a woman to your son?" Amarle, so Rabbi Yehuda said, "Miyadana mehecha ansif." Miyadana, do I know where I'm marrying from? Do I know the lineage? I'm worried about the lineage. Amarle, so he said back, Ula said, Atu anan miyadinan mehecha kasinan. And us, do we know where we come from? We could also be a problematic lineage. Maybe we come from those about whom the verse says, in Eicha, it says, Nashim b'tzion inu b'sulos bar Yehuda, that the Babylonian army, Nebuchadnezzar's army, the Babylonians, they were ma'aneh, they afflicted the women in Zion, the Besulos in the cities of Yehuda, the virgins in the cities of Yehuda, meaning the conquerors, the Babylonian conquerors, they took advantage of the women, and who knows, we may be descended from those unions. V'chitema, maybe you'll say, so what? That doesn't affect my lineage, because Ovid Kochavim ve'Eved Abba Bas Yisrael Vlad Kasher. Because if a non-Jew or an Eved or a slave has relations with a Jewish woman, the child is still kosher. So even if we come from them, that doesn't affect the status of our lineage. But B'dilma Mehanach, but maybe you come, says Ula, from the following. Dichsib Behu, it says about them, a pasuk in Amos, it says, Hashochvim al mito shein, those who lie on beds of shein, of ivory, ustruchim al arsosam. And so the Gemara's understanding, struchim means there's there's smelly liquid on their beds. Now what's that liquid, what's that disgusting thing that's on their beds? So the Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, Elu b'nei Adam hamashtinim mayim b'fnei mitoseim arumim. It's talking about people who urinate before their beds naked. I guess before bed they don't want to go to the bathroom anywhere else, so they just urinate right by their beds. That's what it's talking about. That's what he suggested. And the Gemara says, Umegadif bar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba mocked that interpretation. Because the problem is that the very next pasuk, or a few pasukim later, actually, a few verses later, he says, Yahachi, if that's the case, Hayu d'chsiv. I mean, does that make sense with the verse that appears a couple of verses later that says, L'cheng ata yigu b'rosh golim. Therefore now they should be exiled at the front of the exiles. Mishum demashtinim mayim b'fnei mitosem arumim, because they urinate on their beds naked. Yigu b'rosh golim, they should be the first ones to be sent into exile. Like, that's not, I mean, it's disgusting, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Why would they be punished that they should be the ones to go first into exile? So it must be they were doing something worse. So Elam Rabbi Abba, so rather Rabbi Abba said, what is this pasuk referring to? What is these people whose beds are full of a smelly liquid that have to be the ones to go into exile first? So he says, Elu b'nei Adam she'ochlun v'shosin zem zem. It's talking about people who eat and drink together, meaning couples. They get too close, umadbikin mitoseim zu b'zu, and then they move their beds close to each other, next to each other, machifin v'shoseim zelazeh, and they trade wives with each other, umasrichim arisosam v'shichva zera, shenim shalahem, and they get their beds dirty with semen that doesn't belong to them. Each man on the other one's bed. So that's what the pasuk is referring to. So it's referring to these terrible singers that the prophet Amos was referred to, and he said to these people that you're going to be the first to go into exile. That's something bad. That's adultery. That's understood why they should be the first to go into exile. So how did we come to this? So this is Ula telling Rabbi Yehuda, who knows where we come from? We could be from these people. You don't know. So why are you so concerned to marry her? You don't want to marry your son because you don't know who the yichus of the woman is. But how do you know your own yichus? Who knows? Maybe we come from these terrible people who produced mamzerim. So Amar le heichin avid. So Rabbi Yehuda said, so what should I do? Amar le, so Ula said, zil basar shtikusa. Look for those who are quiet. Look for those who are quiet, because the assumption is that people who can't remain silent, those who are, and specifically those who argue a lot, are of bad yichus, because what would happen is the people who are bad yichus, people wouldn't want to marry them, and they would become combative. So that would run in their bloodlines. So if you see people who are able to be silent and are not combative and aggressive, so then that's what you should go for. But people who are more combative, they get into fights a lot, that's a good sign that they have bad yichus, bad lineage. So that's what he said, you should look for those who are able to remain silent. Ki hai debadki b'nei ma'arava, ki minsu. Sorry, b'nei ma'arava. That's what the b'nei ma'arava, the people of the west, the people of Eretz Yisrael, that's how they looked into people. Ki minsu beitrei b'hadei adadi. If there were two families that were fighting, or two people, chazu heminayu dekadim v'shasik. They would see which of them was silent first, which of them can get control first. Amri, they would say, Hai miyuchas tvei, this is better yichus. Whoever kept fighting more was a bad yichus, was a bad lineage. Amar Rav says, Shtikusei de Bavel hainu yichusa. Again, same idea that the shtikus, the ability to remain silent in Bavel, that's what shows their yichus, what shows their good lineage. Ask the Gemara, Eini, is that true? Ba'iklo Rav l'Rubeir bar Shafi Chala. Rav went up to the house of bar Shafi Chala, some kind of vinegar maker. Ubadak Bahu, and he looked into him. So Ma'ila bichusa. Doesn't it mean he looked into his yichus, his lineage? So why didn't he just rely on the shtikus if he was silent or not? If that proves one's lineage, so why didn't he just look at that? So the Gemara says, "Well, v'shtikusa." No, when it says he looked into him, he meant he looked into his shtikus, whether he was able to remain silent. Hachikam lahu. This is what he would say to them. Baduku ishaski lo shaski. He said, check out if he's going to be quiet or if he can't be quiet. Can he hold back from getting into a fight or not? That's what will show whether he has good yichus, good lineage. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Im ra'isa shnei bnei adam shemetagrim zeh b'zeh. If you see two people fighting with each other, shemetz psul yesh be'echad mehen. It means one of them has something, a shemetz, a little bit of psul, a little bit of bad lineage in them. Ve'im menichin oso lidabik echad bechaver. You shouldn't let one of them marry the other. Sorry, excuse me. Rashi says that the heavens are not allowing it. And the reason why you see these two people fighting is because Hashem doesn't want them to marry, because one of them has a psul. So I guess the point is, if you see, it's kind of if you see that there's two families not getting along, so there's a reason for that. Meaning there's a heavenly, divine reason, which is that Hashem doesn't want them to marry because one of them has bad lineage. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So that was two people. Now Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi expands it to even families. If you see two families who are at odds with each other, it means one of them has some psul in them, some bad lineage. Again, the heavens are preventing one family from marrying the other into the other family. Okay. Now the Gemara is we've been talking about the lineage, the good lineage of Bavel. Well, what's Bavel? What are the borders of Babylonia? So Amar Rapapa Saba Mishmei de Rav. Rapapa Saba, the elder Rapapa, second name of Rav. Bavel, sorry, before we get to the borders, first it makes another point. It says, Bria, Bavel is Bria. People from Bavel are healthy, meaning we assume they're of good lineage. Mishon, people from Mishon, Misa, they're dead. Meaning, we assume they're all bad lineage. They're all mamzerim. Madai, if you're from Medea, Chola, you're sick. Meaning, sick people usually recover. Some don't. So, most of them are kosher, he's saying. Some of them are pasul. Elam, goseses. Elam is a goses. A goses is someone on the brink of death. Elam is on the brink of death. They're mostly pasul, they're mostly bad lineage, some of them are kosher. Uma ben chol and lagosin. The Gemara says, what's the difference between a chol, a sick person, and a goses, which is also very sick? Because Rav Chol L'Chayim, Rav Gosim L'Misa. The idea is that most sick people recover, and most Gosim die. And so that's the place that's described as sick. As sick means most are good, most are fine. There's some people who are not going to recover, meaning they have bad lineage. And the place that's described as a Goses, that's because most of the people are of bad lineage. Okay, now it gets to the borders. It says, Ad Heichon hi Bavel. How far does Bavel go? So Rav Amar Ad Nahar Azak. Rav says it goes until the river Azak. Ushmul Amar Ad Nahar Yonai. It goes until the river Yoni. So Rashi elaborates a little bit on the geography of Bavel, of Babylonia. He says, Babylonia rests between two rivers, the river Chidekel and the river Pras, and that's the majority of it. But the Gemara wants to know beyond those rivers, is there more expanse that's still Bavel? And that's what it's saying, that it actually is a little bit more. It goes up until Nahar Azak, according to Rav, and according to Shmuel, it goes until the river Yoni. Le'el b'diglas adhecha. What about to the north, following the Diglas, which I think is the Tigris, which might be the same as Chidekel, I'm not sure. How far does it go? So Rav Amar ad Bagda, it goes up to Bagda, Va'avna, and Avna, Shmuel Amar ad Mushkini. And it goes up to Mushkini. Now it implies, V'lo Mushkini b'chal, that Mushkini is, or I should say, up until Mushkini, implying that Mushkini is not included. And the Gemara asks, V'lo Mushkini b'chal, is Mushkini not included as well? V'amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Shmuel, Mushkini harehi kagola l'yuchsing. Mushkini is like Gola. Gola, it means the exile, but it refers specifically to Pumbedisa, and it's a city in Babel. And he's saying Mushkini is like that, l'yuchsing, in terms of Yichus, meaning it's considered part of Babel, that we assume people have good lineage. Ela ad Mushkini and Mushkini b'chlal. So rather, when we say up until Mushkini, we mean including Mushkini. L'sachtis b'digla adhecha. How far does it go south by the Diglas River? Amar Shmuel ad Apamia tata. Shmuel says it goes until the lower Apamia. Because Tarti Apamia Havyan. There were two cities called Apamia. Chada Elisa v'chada Taisa. One was further up, one was further down. Chada Kasher v'chada Psula. One was of good lineage and one was of pasul lineage. Ubein Chada v'chada Parsa. There was a Parsa distance between them. V'kakaptia adadi. And these two cities did not get along. They wouldn't help each other at all. V'afilu nura lo emotionally adadi. They wouldn't even lend each other fire, which doesn't cost you anything to lend. They didn't get along. V'simanech. And the way to remember which one was the one that's pasul and which one was the one that's kosher. Dipsulta. V'simanech dipsulta ha demishtaya mishnes. The way you can know which one was pasul, the one that is the one that speaks Meshon, the language of Meshon is the pasul one. Ha demishtaya mishnes. The one who speaks Mishnas is pasul, because remember, and the way you remember that is because Meshon, we said before, that place was like Misa, it was dead. There was no good lineage there. So the city called Apamia, where they speak Meshon, Mishnas, is also considered to be assumed of bad lineage. Okay, we're going to hold there, and the Gemara will continue to discuss the borders of Babel with regards to where we assume that it's of good lineage. I guess going back just one point before, when I mentioned there's two rivers, those are the borders of Babel, but the borders of lineage don't necessarily follow exactly the borders of Babel. So when it said how far does it go, it means at which point do we continue to assume they have the good lineage of Babel, and at which point do we assume that they no longer have that good lineage? That's the borders that we're trying to give over here. Okay, we'll continue next time.